That file was pre-existing unrelated content, not something I need to touch. I don't need to save this to disk. I'll just output the humanized script directly. Daffy Michelle was released from an ICE holding facility at 6:40 in the evening into a night the National Weather Service had flagged with a hard freeze warning. She was 34 years old. She was wearing a short-sleeved intake shirt, cotton pants, and slip-on canvas shoes with no laces. She had no coat. She had no phone. According to the intake and release log later filed in federal court, she was handed a manila envelope containing $1.12 in change, a bus voucher that had expired, and a notice to appear for a hearing 11 weeks out. 6 days later, a Port Authority maintenance worker doing a morning check found her body inside a covered bus shelter on East Ohio Street on Pittsburgh's north side. The Allegheny County medical examiner ruled the cause of death hypothermia. The manner of death, undetermined. She was still holding the manila envelope. Her family is now suing the Department of Homeland Security in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. The complaint runs 61 pages. It alleges that ICE released a woman it knew to be medically compromised, with no coat and no working phone, in the middle of a documented freeze warning in a city where she had no address, no relatives, and did not speak English. The family's lawyers say the government's own paperwork proves the agency knew all of it. The release form lists the outside temperature that evening. It reads 19 degrees. A woman with a sister 40 minutes away died alone in a bus shelter. The phone call that could have saved her never got made, even though the number was written in ink on a form an ICE officer signed. That form has a name. A release of custody worksheet. One specific box on it was left blank. We'll come back to that box. It's the center of the entire lawsuit. Start with who she was, because the government's filings barely mention it. Daffy Michelle came to the United States from Gonaïves, Haiti. According to her sister's declaration in the court record, she arrived in 2021 on a humanitarian parole track after the assassination of Haiti's president, and the earthquake that followed collapsed what was left of the country's institutions. She was a trained pharmacy technician back home. In the U.S., she worked cleaning offices in the East Liberty neighborhood of Pittsburgh and sent money back to 2 children still in Gonaïves. She was detained during a routine check-in. That's the first fact that doesn't fit. She wasn't arrested in a raid. She wasn't picked up on a warrant. According to the complaint, on a Tuesday in January, she walked, voluntarily, into the ICE field office to do exactly what her parole terms required. Report in person. She brought her paperwork. She brought a folder. Instead of being stamped and sent home, she was detained on the spot, because a status review flagged that her parole had lapsed during a processing backlog she had no part in creating. Here's the detail the family's attorneys hammer in the filing. Daffy Michelle had a heart condition, specifically a diagnosed arrhythmia she took daily medication to control. The medication was in that folder. The intake nurse logged it. The court record includes the intake medical screening, and it notes, in the facility's own handwriting, cardiac history, on meds, meds retained. Retained. They took her medication and logged that they took it. Hold on to that word. It matters later, more than almost anything else in this case. She spent 19 days in custody. 19 days is not a long detention by ICE standards. But the medical log, filed as an exhibit, shows she reported chest pain twice and dizziness once during those 19 days. On the second chest pain complaint, a facility clinician recommended, in writing, a cardiology follow-up upon release or transfer. Upon release. Somebody wrote that she would need cardiac follow-up the moment she walked out the door. Then the door opened, and there was no follow-up, no referral, no coat, and no ride. Now the obvious question. Why release her at all if she was sick and had a hearing pending? This is where the paperwork gets strange, and it's the part ICE has never fully explained on the record. According to a declaration from an ICE supervisor filed in response to the suit, Daffy Michelle was released under a discretionary provision after her attorney secured a review of her custody status. In plain terms, her lawyer got her out. That should have been the good news of this story. Her release was a small legal victory. A judge's review, a supervisor's signature, and the detention ends. On paper, it looks like the system working. Except the release happened at 6:40 p.m. The facility she was held in sits in a semi-rural county, roughly a 55-minute drive from downtown Pittsburgh. There is no scheduled public transit from the facility to the city after 7 p.m. The bus voucher in her envelope, the one the government provided, was for a route that had stopped running for the night 40 minutes before she was released. The court filing includes the transit schedule as an exhibit. The last bus was the 6 o'clock. She was released at 6:40. Here's the actual sequence, using only what's in the record. A woman with a heart condition, whose medication had been logged as retained, is walked out a side door into a 19-degree night in short sleeves, with $1.12, an expired voucher for a bus that already left, and a court date 11 weeks away. And the last person to sign her release worksheet left one box blank. The box is labeled Sponsor/Point of Contact Notified, Y/N. It's a standard field. When a detainee has someone on file who can pick them up, the officer is supposed to call that contact and mark yes. Daffy Michelle had a contact on file. Her sister, Marie, lived in the McKeesport area, roughly 40 minutes away, and had a car. Marie's phone number was in the file. It was written on the intake sheet the day Daffy was detained. The sister's declaration states she had told the facility in a phone call, "Call me the second she's out, day or night, I will come." The box was left blank. No call was made. Marie Michelle did not learn her sister had been released until 4 days later, when she called the facility to ask about the next hearing, and a staff member told her Daffy was no longer in custody. She had been out for 4 days, and no one had told the one person waiting to pick her up. The declaration describes what that phone call was actually like. Marie says she asked the staff member 3 times to repeat it because it did not make sense. Her sister had no coat with her, no money, no way to call. She says she drove to the facility that same afternoon and stood at the front counter asking where Daffy had been dropped, and no one could tell her. There was no record of a destination. The form recorded that a release had occurred. It did not record where a human being had gone. Marie went home and started calling hospitals. She would not know for 2 more days that she should have been calling the medical examiner instead. That's the box the lawsuit is built on. One field. One phone call that took 30 seconds and never happened. ICE's position, laid out in the government's motion to dismiss, is that once a person is released from custody, the agency's legal duty to them effectively ends at the door. The government's brief argues that Daffy Michelle was a free adult, that release from detention restores liberty, and that the agency cannot be held responsible for what happens to someone after they are no longer detained. In the government's framing, the moment she stepped outside, she was simply a person in a city, and what happened to her was a tragedy, not a violation. The family's lawyers call that argument the whole problem. Here's their counter, and it's the sentence that's going to define this case. You cannot take a sick woman's medication, log that you took it, note that she'll need cardiac care the moment she's out, strip her of a coat, hand her a dead voucher, and then release her at night into a freeze warning and call the street restored liberty. Their brief puts it in one line. The agency did not open a door to freedom. It opened a door to a 19-degree night and closed it behind her. Go back to that word from earlier. Retained. The facility retained her cardiac medication under ICE's own detention standards, the ones published in the agency's National Detention Standards and cited directly in the complaint. Property and medication taken at intake are supposed to be returned at release. The complaint alleges her medication was not in the envelope. It was still in the facility's property room. Her heart medication, the pills a clinician had already flagged, sat in a locked room in a county 55 minutes away while she walked toward a city she couldn't reach. She wasn't only cold. According to the family's medical expert, she was off the medication that controlled her arrhythmia for the entire time she was exposed. The expert declaration in the file states that cardiac arrhythmia combined with hypothermia is a known lethal combination. Cold stresses the heart, and an unmedicated arrhythmia in freezing conditions raises the risk of sudden cardiac collapse. The medical examiner ruled hypothermia. The family's expert says the heart and the cold killed her together, and the agency held the one thing that could have kept the heart steady. Here's the part the official statements didn't mention. After Daffy Michelle's death made local news, the DHS Office of Inspector General had already, separately, months earlier, flagged this exact category of failure. A 2024 DHSOIG report on release protocols found that field offices were inconsistently completing point-of-contact notifications and were releasing detainees without confirmed transportation or shelter arrangements in multiple locations. The report is public. It predates her death. The failure that killed Daffy Michelle was, according to the government's own watchdog, a known, documented pattern before it ever reached her. That's the uncomfortable fact. This wasn't one officer forgetting one box on one bad night. The OIG had written it up as a systemic gap. The blank box was the pattern, arriving at one specific woman. Now trace the 6 days, because the record actually lets us. Surveillance and transit card data cited in the complaint place Daffy Michelle in downtown Pittsburgh within the first 48 hours after release. A convenience store camera on the north side recorded a woman matching her description entering at 9:14 one evening, buying nothing, standing near the door heater for roughly 11 minutes, and leaving. A shelter intake worker, in a statement to police, said a woman who spoke only Haitian Creole came to the door one night, but the shelter was at capacity, and the worker could not communicate where the overflow beds were. There was no interpreter. She left. She spoke French and Creole. Pittsburgh's cold weather shelters, according to the city's own after-incident review, had no on-call Creole interpreter line that night. So even the safety net that existed, the shelter, the door, the worker who wanted to help, couldn't reach her across the language. A woman standing inside a warm doorway, 11 minutes from surviving the night, turned back into the cold because no one in the room could tell her, in a language she understood, where to go. The after-incident review adds one more detail that's hard to read. The overflow beds that night were not full. There were open spaces at a second location less than a mile away, and the intake worker knew it. The worker just had no way to say the address in a language Daffy could follow, and no phone line to hand her that would. The review notes the worker wrote down the cross streets on a slip of paper and held it out. It's not clear she understood what it was. The slip was not among her belongings when she was found. Somewhere between that doorway and the bus shelter, the one direction that could have led her indoors was lost. The bus shelter on East Ohio Street where she was found is enclosed on 3 sides. It's the kind of place someone goes to get out of the wind. The medical examiner's timeline estimates she had been there, based on the state of the body and the weather log, for most of a night and into the morning. She still had the envelope. The expired voucher was still inside it. She had, the whole time, been carrying the government's promise of a bus that didn't run. Marie Michelle identified her sister's body on a Thursday. In her declaration, she describes the canvas shoes with no laces, the intake shoes, still on her sister's feet. 6 days after release, Daffy Michelle was still dressed exactly as ICE had released her. Nothing about her had changed. She never made it anywhere. She never got warm. She just moved from one cold place to a slightly less cold one, until she couldn't anymore. Here's the question the family wants a jury to sit with, and it's the one ICE's motion tries hardest to make go away. If a facility takes your medication, logs that you'll need a doctor the moment you're out, and then releases you at night in short sleeves into a freeze to a bus that doesn't exist, at what point did they stop being responsible for you? The government says, at the door. The family says, you don't get to engineer the danger and then disown it at the threshold. That's the legal fight now moving through the Western District of Pennsylvania. The suit is brought under the Federal Tort Claims Act, and it names the United States as defendant. The family is asking for damages, but the sister's declaration says the number isn't the point. What she wants, in her words, is for the box to stop being blank. A rule that release into a freeze warning requires confirming somewhere to go and something to wear, and a phone call, 30 seconds long, that's mandatory instead of optional. There is a development the initial press releases left out entirely. After Daffy Michelle's death, the field office involved quietly updated its release procedures. According to a document produced in discovery and cited in a later filing, the office issued an internal directive requiring supervisors to confirm transportation and cold weather clothing before any release when the temperature is below freezing. The directive is dated 11 weeks after her body was found. The agency changed the rule. It just changed it after she was dead, and it never said her name when it did. So the box gets a checkbox now. The notification the officer skipped is now, at that office, a required step. Every one of those changes is an admission written in bureaucratic language, an acknowledgement that the old way could kill someone, made only after it did. The facts carry this last part on their own. A government is a set of procedures. When they work, no one notices. When one box goes unchecked, a woman with a bad heart freezes to death in a bus shelter, holding a ticket for a bus that already left, and the system doesn't register that it failed, because on paper, every form was completed. The release was authorized, the signature was valid, the paperwork was, technically, correct. That's what should keep people up at night. Not that someone broke the rules, that someone followed them. The lawsuit is unresolved. The government's motion to dismiss is pending before the court, and no trial date has been set. ICE has declined to comment on active litigation. The DHSOIG report that predicted this failure remains public on the agency's own website, its findings still listed as open. Marie Michelle keeps her sister's manila envelope in a drawer. The expired voucher is still inside it. Daffy Michelle was released at 6:40 p.m. The last bus had left at 6. She was 5'2", wearing short sleeves and canvas shoes with no laces, carrying $1.12 in a 19-degree night in a city she couldn't ask for directions in, with her heart medication locked in a room 55 minutes away. The form that sent her out there had one box left blank. Her sister's phone number was written 3 lines above it.